So if some of them are no longer succumbing, then they are no longer motivated to lead a celibate lifestyle anymore. In fact, this was something which they felt ashamed of. So they had to find a place where they could conceal themselves in order to have their way. And this started to be the settling down of couples, where they would build houses, not to live in or to keep the rain off, but to hide their shameless behavior. So they start to be settling down. Once this happened again, the staple food became more coarse than before. Now instead of being creepers, it started to be a form of corn or a form of rice. But not rice like in the present day. It was rice that if you picked the seeds of rice from the heads of corn hanging down, by the next morning it would have grown back. So there would be no scar left on the head of corn when you broke off a seed from it to eat. But because people started to become territorial, because they had their own houses now, then they started to divide up the land. And each morning they would go out to harvest enough to feed themselves during that day. They would take only as much as they needed. Later on though, some people's quality of mind deteriorated yet further. They started to think, well, can't be bothered to go out to get rice every day, how about going out every second day and during that day collecting up twice as much as they needed. So they start to have hoarding of food. When it became worse than that, some of them didn't even stay in their own territories. They started to take food from the other side of the fence in their neighbors' vegetable patches or whatever. And when this started to happen, turned out that the quality of the food deteriorated yet further. It would no longer be rice that grew back every day, but it started to be the rice like in the present day, when there would be a scar left on the head of rice or the head of corn when you broke off the seed. So this made life worse still. Some people stole their food from their neighbors, and when they were caught, they lied and said, "Oh, it wasn't me, I wasn't stealing." They told blatant lies. So apart from them starting to be stealing, there would also be lying happening. And when this deteriorated further, when some people were shameless in their lying, they had to set up a person to be a judge of who was right or wrong in a particular situation where there was a conflict. And this would be the first king to govern society in those days. Before that time, there was no need to be governed because people stuck to honesty, especially to 5 precepts. You know what I mean by 5 precepts? It happened naturally. No one spoke about Buddhism, but 5 precepts were there in place as a natural consequence of people living together. So when we talk about 5 precepts, in fact, they are much older than Buddhism itself. One thing else I'd like to say is that people at that time were very much taller than people are in the present day. Apart from being long-lived, like living for hundreds of thousands of years, instead of living for 100 years, they're also very large. And I've seen photographs of some excavations of archaeological sites where they found the skulls of apparently human beings, where the skulls themselves were as tall as a human being stands tall in the present day. So the skull was 6 foot high. So there is some evidence, but this is like long before dinosaurs, okay? And the grains of food which we're talking about, a grain of rice would be this sort of size. So it's no wonder that, you know, 1 grain of rice could support them for days at a time. So this is prehistory. You don't hear about this sort of age of human beings happening. We tend to think that human beings started off living in caves, or being descended from monkeys or whatever. But what we find is, in fact, it's exactly the opposite. That human beings in the present day are deteriorated as compared with their ancestors. So what happens? We come back to our graph again. Further down the line, further down the curve of this decline, we come to where we are in the present day. So somewhere here, what's the average lifespan in the present day? 75 years. Okay. In those days, hundreds of thousands of years. So lifespan has deteriorated, quality of life has deteriorated as people's quality of mind has deteriorated. Especially as the way they treated each other becomes worse. As they become more dishonest, more shameless, then lifespan deteriorates. Why? Because the quality of the food deteriorates. It brings with it more illnesses, more impurities in the food. And it's said that all things being equal, lifespan of the average lifespan of human beings will become 1 year less with every 100 years that passes. And from what we know of recent history, if you look back to the time of the Buddha, the average lifespan of human beings in those days was 100 years. That was 2,500 years ago. So if you divide that by 100, lifespan has become 25 years less since 2,500 years ago. So it adds up. So if you look back further than that, it must have been a long, 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 long time ago if people had a lifespan of 100,000 years. And it goes on. We come up to another teaching which we find also in the Buddhist scriptures, which describes the end of this decline, so the end of the curve here. And this teaching is called the Cakkavatti Sutta. It describes about a point in time where people descend into savagery and where lifespan of human beings is only 10 years old. Where as children they grow up, by the time they're 1.5 or 3 years old, they're looking for a mate. They're settling down, getting married by the age of 5, and they're dead by the age of 10. And in those days you don't need to talk about morality anymore. People hunt each other as they'd hunt animals. They don't have any idea of faithfulness to a particular husband or wife. They'd eat each other as readily as they'd eat wild animals in the forest. So there's nothing left of morality in such a time. In Thai we call this kaliyuga, the dark age of mankind. And it's a time when people are completely lost when they are talking about morality. And there will come a time when there's a sort of holocaust, where people hunt each other for food until there's virtually no one left anymore. And at that time there'll be a few people who run away into the forests, and once it's all over, they come out again and they embrace each other and say, oh, you survived this as well. From now on, we're never going to make this mistake again. From now on, we're going to try to live a more civilized life. And as a result of that, then there's an upturn in lifespan, in quality of lifestyle, and again, there's a development to the point that people will become more civilized, and eventually their lifespan increases again to hundreds of thousands of years. When during this cycle would a Buddha appear? Well, a Buddha would appear sometime during the decline, and it's said that he will choose a time to come to earth when people have a lifespan of not more than 100,000 years and not less than 100 years. Why not more than 100,000 years? Because if he talks about impermanence or deterioration of the body, If you talk about that to a person who lives for hundreds of thousands of years, they just laugh at you and say it's rubbish, because they've never seen a person die since they've been alive. If people have a lifespan of less than 100 years, like us, the Buddha said that life is so short that people don't have enough time to produce significant amounts of good deeds to make any difference in their life, to see the results of their good deeds. So again, the Buddha's teachings would be lost on them. So, for our point of view, we're lucky the Buddha's teachings have not disappeared yet, but we don't have the chance to meet him personally anymore, because we've been born in a time when our lifespan is already beyond the 100-year mark. So, we get some idea about what's happening here in the cycle of things. You start to see now why in Buddhism we link environment, staple diet, with people's quality of life and their quality of mind. Okay, you can take it as a legend if you like, but at least try to understand why we make this link. Don't think that we are the ultimate of society, or society is getting better as a result of our efforts. In fact, it's not. In as far as our morality becomes worse, in fact, we are speeding up the deterioration of society. Some people might say, so what? Every 100 years we have to have a lifespan which is 1 year shorter. But in fact, it's not hard and fast. If people behaved in a moral way, if people respected morality in society, you can freeze this deterioration. Maybe not go as far as to reverse it, but certainly you can slow it down. There's no reason that within 5,000 years we need to come to the end of civilization as we know it. And got another, how much left? 75, 60, 6,500 years. It can be longer than that if we respect morality and put the teaching which we know into proper practice. But if things go as they are going, and I'm sure many of you can think of examples of deterioration in society which you wouldn't believe is happening in some places, where even supposedly civilized people degrade themselves into the sorts of behaviors which we'd never seen before. Where people are treating each other in very savage ways, even in supposedly civilized societies. You can see the signs of this deterioration are starting to come through, where young children are behaving in ways which we'd never believe a child would behave like that before. As if primal instincts are coming out in some way.